Nik Mehta.
오늘은 니케 씨 메타.
A very warm welcome, Nik Mehta, our new British High Commissioner to Singapore.
I had the privilege and honour to present my letter of credence to President Tharman, and I officially became the 17th British High Commissioner.
Blackpink has a royal seal of approval.
So I heard that you're the man who set that into motion.
Well, there's a long story to the Blackpink episode.
A pair of bronze figures now stand at Fort Canning Park.
Should we be putting up another statue of, someone from the colonial era?
There's been a bit more criticism, essentially because he was still a colonial master.
And there are more voices today challenging traditionally positive narratives of British colonial rule.
A Labour landslide after 14 years in opposition, a spectacular turnaround.
What happens when you transition from one government to another?
Earlier this year, there was this massive situation when it came to Kate Middleton.
The mystery surrounding her condition is deepening.
There has been no update, no pictures, no anything. Obviously, people started to freak out.
However, tests after the operation found cancer had been present.
What are some of the lessons that you've learned or picked up along the way that you will bring to your role moving forward?
I think it's so important that we have these sorts of open conversations.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Season 2 of Political Prude, the podcast. Now, before we jump into the episode, please give our podcast a 5-star rating and hit the follow button on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you're on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on all the insightful conversations to come. This week, we're turning our attention to the UK and its relationship with Singapore. Joining us today is His Excellency Nik Mehta, the new British High Commissioner to Singapore, who took on the role in July 2024. He's the man behind Blackpink meeting the king, and in a diplomatic career spanning over 2 decades, he was the Political Counsellor in Malaysia, the Deputy Ambassador at the British Embassy in South Korea, and also UK's National Security Community's co-champion for race. I would love to have a conversation with him about his role as a British High Commissioner, Singapore's colonial history, and also, of course, all about the royal family. Enjoy the episode. Mr. Nik Mehta, welcome to Political Prude, the podcast.
Oh, it's brilliant to be here with you, Joel. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Now, before we jump into our conversation proper, I must and have to ask you all about Blackpink. So last year, King Charles awarded the members of Blackpink honorary MBEs. So I heard that you're the man who set that into motion. So can you please tell me more about it? How did that even come about?
Well, there's a long story to the Blackpink episode, but it centers around the brilliant team that I worked with in South Korea and our desire to make the most of our COP26 year as the presidents of the UN Climate Change Conference, and to really bring attention around the world to the climate change agenda. And what better group to do it with than the biggest girl band in the world?
Yeah, but how do you know that they would even say yes to something like this?
We didn't. we really didn't, and I think it speaks to the heart of what diplomacy is about. Somebody in my team came up with the idea that we should try and work with a really famous Korean global name in order to raise the profile of climate change beyond South Korea. And we thought about Son Heung-min because he was, of course, and is a major football star in the UK.
Yes.
And then another colleague said, "Look, what about Blackpink? I know somebody who knows the producer and the manager of Blackpink." And then we made the pitch to YG Entertainment, having done our research as well and discovered that the girls were really big fans of nature and climate change and had spoken about this passion previously. So we felt that there was a coming together of ideas, but it still took a lot of imagination from a brilliant group of people to pull it off.
Was there any interesting stories that you can share from that entire experience?
I've got some amazing stories. I mean, we so just to give you the kind of the headline fact of what we did with them. So over the period of about 18 months or so, we produced 4 or 5 videos with Blackpink, and they were all designed around the theme of getting young people involved in climate change. These videos went viral. I think at the last time I saw the numbers, they were about 110 million views, far greater than we could have imagined. We had 5 million views in 24 hours of our first video. I think we were hoping for 5,000. It was mind blowing, the reach. But what was particularly amazing is that it went beyond Korea. All over the world, young people were using our hashtag and getting involved in a conversation about what they can do in their area on climate change. And I think for me, there was a couple of points that were really interesting. We came up with this idea of the girls becoming the Prime Minister's advocates for climate change, officially recognising them. So that we got Boris Johnson, who was the Prime Minister at the time, to write a letter to them, and that's the moment where they came to our ambassador's house. I got to meet them. We presented the certificate to them, and then they did an exclusive BBC interview on the back of it. Was quite special. But for me, I have to say the most brilliant thing was every year we do something called we did do at the Queen's birthday party. Her late Majesty the Queen's birthday party. We now do the King's birthday party. But at the Queen's birthday party at my ambassador's residence in South Korea, unbeknownst to anyone, we got the girls to turn up. And there was this proper mic drop moment where the ambassador is talking about how amazing it was to work with Blackpink over the last year. And then he said, here they are, and they came through the doors. And you can imagine this audience who had no idea that it was going to happen saw the most popular band in the world. It's quite incredible.
I'm incredibly jealous. Like, I was obviously in concert when they were here in Singapore for the Blackpink tour.
Yeah.
But just to be able to, I guess, work with them, I think that's an interesting experience. I wouldn't expect, anyone from, the diplomatic side or the politics side to be working with a band like Blackpink.
Yeah.
When I first saw that the Palace, the band, they were like playing Blackpink songs at the Palace, I was like, wait, this is so strange, but also like, you never know. I never knew I wanted this until I saw it. That was the coolest experience ever.
And I think that you can somehow, you get into a mindset of thinking diplomacy is all around protocol, and it's very formulaic, and it's very kind of 18th century. And actually, modern diplomacy is about connecting issues to people. And, Blackpink was the most perfect sort of band to do that with, and I think that we can be more and more imaginative about how we do diplomacy. And that's one example. And it takes real imagination to pull something like that off. But there are countless ones like that all around the world.
Absolutely. Well, I want to scratch your brain and talk about that a little bit later on. But first, congratulations on getting the role as the British High Commissioner. But for those who don't really understand what the role entails, maybe you can just share with us what the responsibilities are.
Thanks, Joel. I am absolutely delighted to be here as the British High Commissioner. I think that some people confuse what a High Commissioner is and what an ambassador is and what a diplomat is. So let me try and decode some of this for you. A diplomat is somebody that represents his or her country in another country, and their role is to be a human bridge between the two countries in order to help develop the security or prosperity of their host country, their home country. An ambassador or a high commissioner, they are effectively the same thing, but they are the most senior diplomat in a particular country. Ambassadors are in most countries around the world, but high commissioners are effectively ambassadors in Commonwealth countries. That's the only distinction. In terms of what we do, our responsibilities are to oversee the totality of work that happens in my case, between UK and Singapore. That might range from our security and defence partnership through to trade and investment, and that's obviously a very, very important part of the relationship we have with Singapore, all the way through to climate change, science and innovation, technology, education, you name it. The ambassador is responsible for overseeing it. But we're also, importantly, responsible for and providing support to our citizens that are in the country. So any British nationals that are visiting Singapore, if they are in need of consular support, our job is to make sure that they receive that, and it's an important undertaking.
Right. So what would be like a real life example of that?
Yeah. So a real life example would be an individual who might have lost his or her passport and needs to get back to the UK urgently for a family emergency. Our team would work to make sure that they got the support that they needed, the help they needed in order to be able to return home safely.
Right. And I mean, from my very limited understanding, it's like, don't you go to the embassy for that? I don't know how it works actually.
So, Joel, I think there's often a bit of confusion over what a high commissioner does, what an ambassador does, what an embassy is, what a high commission is, and what a diplomat works to do. So let me try and decode this for you, because it's not straightforward. So a diplomat is the representative of a country to another country, and their job is to build human bridges between the country they're coming from to the country they're in order to support the security, prosperity, etc., of both countries. An ambassador or a high commissioner, they are the most senior representatives in that country. A high commissioner is an ambassador in a Commonwealth country, and similarly, an embassy and a high commission are the same thing, but a high commission is in a Commonwealth country.
Right.
So high commission, high commissioner in a Commonwealth country like Singapore, ambassador, embassy in the US, for example.
Okay, that makes things so much clearer. Yes. Okay, great. So, I mean, you talked about the three different pillars, I guess, and maybe we can dive into each one. So, when it comes to things like prosperity, and you said, what the commission does is basically bring in British companies here or UK companies here, and then also bring Singapore companies there. Like for the average Singaporean, or maybe just for Singaporeans in general, like how does doing that actually benefit like us?
Yeah, how does it benefit Singaporeans?
Yeah.
So let's break it down. I mean, the first thing I should make clear is that we have a strategic partnership with Singapore that was signed in September 2023 that oversees the totality of our relationship, and these are some of the things I've talked about, pillars within that. So, if a British company comes into to Singapore, let's say it's a food and drinks company, not mentioning any names, but there's some really good food and drink companies here from the UK. What we can do is help them to establish their presence here and talk to them about how they might do that to land successfully. We do that in conjunction with our Chamber of Commerce that's based here, and that company will have an opportunity to sell its goods to the Singaporean public, and those goods may not be available through other means. But we also have 6,000 businesses in Singapore. The majority of people that they employ are Singaporean nationals, so we create employment opportunities for them as well. And it goes the other way. I am really, really keen to get Singaporean investment into UK to support UK businesses and hopefully drive profits for Singapore, but also increase jobs in both countries.
So the UK general election happened this year, and that resulted in the shift from a Conservative to the Labour Party leadership. So I'm hoping to understand how such a shift can actually impact the operations or even the priorities of the British High Commission in Singapore. Specifically, I'm quite interested in how the High Commission would adjust, if ever, its strategies, or just maintain continuity during such political transitions. And I'm asking this because I don't like Singapore is one of those unique situations whereby we don't really see that kind of transitions. It's been one party for a very long time. So I've always been curious about how other countries do it. Yeah.
Joel, it's a really good question about what happens when you transition from one government to another. In the UK's case, because the vast majority of our diplomats, ambassadors, high commissioners, and you know what those are now, are civil servants, not political appointees, the change in government doesn't affect their function, their roles. But what does change quite significantly is the new government's priorities become the ones that each embassy and high commission should adopt. So we will spend the next few weeks really understanding what the new government wants us to deliver and to make sure that our objectives here reflect those priorities. And we've already seen that the new government, the new Labour government that won in a landslide a month ago, has hit the ground running. It wants to focus on economic growth, and the engineering for economic growth is in Southeast Asia. So I can see the trade and investment relationship being of paramount importance to them. But so will security and defence. And I'm so pleased that our Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, was able to visit Vientiane for the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting so soon after the election. And I'm firmly of the belief that our commitment to this region will endure for years and years to come.
So earlier on, you mentioned about soft power, which is such a fascinating concept. And we see that exemplified today in South Korea's K-wave and Thailand's boy love phenomenon. In your opinion, what do you think is the UK's soft power of today?
I mean, I think soft power has become a very, very trendy term, hasn't it? Everyone uses it. But there's a great survey that a company called Brand Finance did earlier this year, where they asked 100,000 people around the world to rate countries on the basis of categories of soft power, as it were. And the UK and the US were the top two countries in the world for that soft power. And I honestly think, and of course I would say this as the British High Commissioner, but I think that our soft power offer, whether that is in music, and so pleased that Dua Lipa is coming to Singapore later this year, or Harry Styles came recently, and Take That. I think our music soft power is amazing. But I also think British TV is world renowned. Our comedy is outstanding. And then, of course, our sports. And I left the best for last because, as a massive Liverpool fan, it is my job here to help promote things like the English Premier League in Singapore. And I think those sorts of things are uniquely ours, and they are very, very special assets.
Right. Actually, one thing that I think not everyone might understand is the concept of soft power. So I'm going to put you on the spot right now. Maybe help to explain what soft power is.
Yeah. So I see soft power as things that help us build bridges between cultures or between countries that are outside of the normal kind of security and prosperity that I've talked about, but are softer, as the name suggests, and they are your kind of musics, your arts, your culture, your sports. But I think there is a misimpression or misunderstanding that somehow soft power and hard power, one is more important than the other. And my firm view is that you build a relationship with a country both by the hard power engagement that you have, but also the soft power connections.
Right. Thank you for explaining that. Actually, I have my opinion on what the UK's most powerful soft power is. So one is Percy Pig candy. It is the best thing ever. If you guys have never tried it, please, Marks & Spencer. So good. And then,
I'm glad you said where it's sold, because I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that. But it is amazing.
It's
amazing.
My favorite candy.
Yeah.
And then just the regular Percy, not the veggie Percy, just saying.
Well, as a vegetarian, I have to stop you there and say, you can also get vegan marshmallows in the store that you mentioned.
Right. And then the second one is I'm so sorry I have to say this, but Love Island UK. Iconic content right there.
You can see me nodding. But it has become a massive thing.
It's a cultural phenomenon.
Where you come into work the day after an episode and it is all people can talk about. It is massive. But there are other brilliant brilliant shows, like The Traitors. I don't know if that has
Oh
made
my
it to
gosh,
Singapore.
you should listen. No, it's not in Singapore.
Okay.
I'm obsessed with The
It
Traitors.
is amazing, isn't it?
But the US version more so because they bring in the survivor players. But the UK version is also very good.
But you always have to go to the original. Like with any of these things, the original is always the best, and then it gets kind of, twisted for different markets. But yeah, go back to the original gangster, I think.
Yes. So early on, before this conversation that we were having, we were just chatting casually for a little bit, and we did talk about some of the experiences you've had, even though it's just been 9 days. Maybe you can share with us what are some interesting stories that you can share about taking on this role and the perks that you've received so far.
Well, we talked earlier in the podcast about what a high commissioner is, but we haven't talked about how you become a high commissioner.
Yes.
Which I think is, or an ambassador. I mean, the process is almost identical. But one of the really interesting things that you have to do is present a letter. It's called a letter of credence from the head of state that is sending you, in my case, His Majesty the King, to the head of state of the country that you're going to. In the case of Singapore, President Tharman. So I had the immense privilege of taking my letter of credence on my second day to the Istana and presenting it to His Excellency, and effectively asking for permission, or my king, asking for permission for me to be the representative here. But I want to tell you a quick story about this, because it always makes me laugh. So the protocol department of our foreign ministry produces the letter, and it's then signed by His Majesty the King. So it has his signature on it, and it has usually a personal, some sort of personal touch to it. So they give you this letter, and the lady that gave it to me said, you have a choice. You can either take it home with you now, or we can send it in the diplomatic bag to Singapore. And this was 3 months before I was due to come to Singapore. And I had visions of taking it back home and my kids finding it, and either deciding to put it onto social media because it would be quite cool to show the King's signature, or deciding to put stickers on it to make it more attractive. So I chose the safe option of getting it sent here and making sure I had it in pristine condition for handing over. So that ceremony happened on day 2, and it was made so much more special and memorable because I went back to our official residence, Eden Hall, and I got to celebrate that moment with the amazing staff that are in the British High Commission, and with some of our wider British family there. It was just very, very special.
Right. And to be clear, you've met both President Tharman and the King now.
I've met President Tharman and His Majesty the King, and meeting His Majesty the King was something that I never dreamed would happen. I never actually thought that I'd become an ambassador one day. It was not in the dream, I guess. And having the opportunity to go to Buckingham Palace and to see His Majesty was just I can't describe how special that was. But he was the first thing he did was reflect on his visits to Singapore and how much he'd enjoyed those, and he talked about his meetings with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, and he had lots of words of wisdom for me as I start my role. So it wasn't formulaic in any way. It felt very, very, very personal to us.
Right. So, I mean, most of us would only have the impression of, like the royal family, the Buckingham Palace through like shows like The Crown. So you've been in there, you've, experienced what it's like to be part of the entire royal experience. What was that like for you? Was it what you expected it to be?
Well, that particular audience with the king was magical. Honestly, from the moment you go from our foreign ministry to Buckingham Palace, and you're in this antechamber waiting and rehearsing how you bow or curtsy, and that whole experience was fantastic. But he is, I think, the world's greatest diplomat, His Majesty the King. He puts you at ease so quickly, and all these fears about what you're going to say and what you might trip over and what you might say incorrectly. He manages to make you relax, and you feel like you're having a conversation with a very wise, very learned person, and that was really special. And I've also, through my career, been lucky enough to spend time with a few members of the royal family. When the now Prince and Princess of Wales, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, as they were then, came to Singapore in 2012, I was in Malaysia at that same time and organised their entire Malaysia visit. So I spent 4 days with the royal couple, took them to a mosque in KL, and then up into the rainforest canopy in Danang Valley in Borneo, and just was blown away by the impact that they can have, a really positive impact on issues from climate change to cultural relations.
So following up on what you said, I actually am quite interested to find out who exactly plans the itineraries of all these royal visits. For example, like if any member of the royal family comes to Singapore, I'm sure someone is proposing what they go to and what they attend, right? They also only have a set amount of time, and I'm sure that everybody wants them to grace their events or to get to meet them in person. So who actually plans what they do?
Yeah, I'm very happy to share from my experience, and I think it's a fairly standard process in most parts of the world. So it's a combination of the palace, and depending on which palace is organising the visit. If it's the king, it's Buckingham Palace, together with the High Commission or embassy in the country that they're coming to, and then really importantly, the government of the country that they're visiting. So in the case of their visit, the royal couple's visit to Malaysia, it really was a process that involved consultation with both. And we will put forward ideas. The Malaysian government did likewise, but ultimately Buckingham Palace and His Majesty will decide what they are happy to do. So some of my and the team's slightly wackier ideas might have been pushed to one side, but others are ones that really sort of grip the imagination. I'll tell you one of those that we worked on that I thought was really special. We wanted, with the Malaysian government, to highlight the issue of climate change and the importance of protecting the rainforest. So we came up with this idea that rather than having a conversation on the ground, we would try and do the conversation at the top of the canopy in the Bornean rainforest. But it's not easy to get a camera crew, the royal couple, and a scientist up in the canopy at the same time, particularly when the weather is a bit dodgy. And that took so much planning. But we knew that if we got that right, the photo of the two of them having this conversation with the beautiful flora and fauna of Borneo in the background would be front page would fill the front pages of newspapers around the world. And thankfully, that's what transpired.
Right. You talk about like royal visits, and obviously I remember how the king came in 2017 and like Prince William came just last year. I know that you just joined the Singapore team, but were there any stories that you can share from, the Singapore team?
Yeah. I mean, I know that they had a wonderful time here, and they were really engaging and actually quite a relaxed royal visitors to work with and to support. But I also know that they wanted to get beyond what tourists might see. The classic image of Marina Bay Sands. And the king went to visit Chong Baru, and when the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge were here, they went to Queenstown. So they really got to see beyond just one kind of modern vision of Singapore. And both the visitors, Prince William and His Majesty King are renowned for their sense of humour, and I think that really came through during their visit.
And when it's the royal family coming to Singapore, is it specifically the British High Commission that is the ones in charge of their visit?
Yeah, I mean, we work obviously closely with the Singapore government. But ultimately, we will work with the Buckingham Palace to pull together the itinerary, and it will be the High Commissioner together with a representative of the Singapore government that will greet the royal visitor when they arrive in the country.
Right.
But it has to be, Joel. It has to be a partnership because they're coming here as a guest of the government of Singapore, of the president, and we want it to feel. We will always want it to feel like that.
Okay. So one last question about the royal family before we move on to the conversation or proper.
This is a bit of a passion of yours, isn't it,
I know.
Joel?
I want the capo. I want all the tea. I want all the royal family tea. No, but it's only because I feel like they're so iconic, right?
Yeah,
like
they really are.
We talk about like the big UK exports, and I really think that the royal family brand is that iconic brand of the UK.
And we didn't talk about the royal family as being a soft power tool, but depending on how you describe soft power, I really think it is. It is a tangible thing that connects people to the UK. And if you had a list of the top 10 things that people know about us, I'm sure the royals will be up. And part of that I am convinced is because of the impact of Her late Majesty around the world. Her sad death was felt by billions of people. I think she had that sort of status.
Absolutely. And, speaking of the public fascination with the royal family, I think earlier this year there was this massive, situation when it came to Kate Middleton. And there was, significant social media speculation, conspiracy, like Tin Hat conspiracies on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, circulating about where she was. And this whole thing just led to widespread concern about her and her well-being. And it was later eventually revealed that she was recovering from cancer.
The surgery was successful. However, tests after the operation found cancer had been present.
Which really just clarified the entire situation. But for me, when I look back at the entire thing, I think what I was more fixated on was how public figures like her have to navigate challenges like these. And also, when it comes to our interview, what I want to ask you is perhaps, how does someone working with public figures like that deal with sensitive issues or tricky situations while still maintaining the work they need to do?
The first thing is this is a human story, and I felt really, really sad about the scrutiny that the King and the Princess of Wales were put under. That intense pressure to talk about what is going on in your private life, but also then having to deal with the challenges of responding to the treatment that they were undergoing. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been, and then to have the courage, as they both have done, to talk publicly about their cancer treatment, and partly driven by a desire to make it easier for other people to talk about similar issues. And I'm sure we'll talk about this a bit later, but the stigma of mental health is a really serious one, not just in the UK, but in many cultures. And I think they both felt that they could perhaps inspire other people to seek the support and help that they might need by being open about their own stories. But there is a wider point about misinformation on the internet, and how that can lead to other theories and could put undue pressure on individuals and on communities. And I think that is something that we're going to have to address collectively around the world. The scam culture, disinformation, misinformation. I think it is a really, really serious issue and can lead to very big problems.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Hello, before we continue with the episode, if you haven't already, here's a reminder to give us a 5-star rating and also hit that follow button on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're on YouTube, you can hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. And now, back to the episode. So the next part of our conversation will be a little bit trickier to navigate, but I still think it's important to have because it is so relevant, right? In my opinion, I've seen really the discourse surrounding colonialism in Singapore having evolved significantly over the last 2 decades. There has been an increased critical examination of our colonial history, and there are more voices today challenging traditionally positive narratives of British colonial rule. And to me, there's this growing movement, especially on social media, towards decolonizing mindsets and encouraging, fellow Singaporeans to view our history and culture through a lens that is not solely influenced by colonial perspectives. And I think this shift is quite evident in recent events, specifically the commissioning and installation of a third public statue of Sir Stamford Raffles earlier this year in May, I believe. And that whole situation ignited this, very passionate debate online about how a country should critically engage with its colonial history. What do you think about everything that is transpiring right now with regards to this topic?
I'm really glad, Joel, that you raised it and we've got a chance to talk about colonial legacy, because I think it's so important that we have these sorts of open conversations. If I may, I want to tell you a little bit about my personal story.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then let's talk about the sort of colonial legacy in Singapore, and I promise I'll come back to the questions that you've asked, because I think they are very, very relevant. Your viewers or your listeners will maybe be able to see that I am not white. I am distinctly a product of Britain's colonial history. My great-grandparents came from India to East Africa at the time when Britain wanted to build a railway that went from the coast all the way inland in Africa. And both my parents are East African of Indian ethnicity. My mother was thrown out of Uganda by Idi Amin's forces at gunpoint in the early 70s, and my father came as an economic migrant from Kenya to the UK at around the same time. So I'm very distinctly a product of that colonial past. But I'm also a very proud British diplomat of Indian ethnicity, and that journey is something that I think is an intrinsic part of my identity. I feel personally that we haven't across the world talked enough about our colonial legacy, and with a view to understanding what that colonial legacy or history is about. We don't teach enough about it in schools, and we don't have these sorts of open conversations. And before I came to Singapore, I felt it was really, really important to understand that history. And I went back to Mark Frost's book on the history of Singapore, the biography of Singapore. I went to our National Archives in the UK to look at all of the documents from 1867 onwards, when the Straits Settlement was formed. And I read as many books as I could to understand what that history looked like, because I think understanding where we've come from is really important to working out where we want to go next. In fact, the first trip that I did during my time here was to Queenstown, because I wanted to really understand how that part of Singapore developed post-independence. So I think understanding is really important. What Singapore decides to do once it when people feel the need to re-examine that history and to take decisions, I think is for Singaporeans to work out. And we've had similar conversations in different parts of the UK, and disagreements over what should be done with artwork and statues. But for me, the important thing is to understand it, understand the history, but don't be totally defined by it. I thought Desmond Lee's, the minister's response to the Stamford Raffles question was really, really eloquent on this very issue. The idea that we must acknowledge our past. We don't want to ignore it, but we also must look forward. And let's be honest, Singapore's story post-independence is one that is renowned across the world. Kind of the dynamism and the growth of the country, the economic growth of the country, I think is unparalleled. And I think there's a huge amount that the UK and many other countries can learn from Singapore.
So, given the complex history of the British colonial rule in Singapore, it's natural to kind of wonder how this history influences current diplomatic efforts and relationships. So, does the historical context of British colonial rule impact the British High Commission's current engagements and relations with Singapore, and how so?
I think it impacts in the sense that we are always cognizant of what's gone before us. What are the things that we've done previously? Where have we worked together? But the reality is that the modern UK Singapore relationship, and I talked about the strategic partnership earlier, is a partnership of equals. There is no kind of hangover from the past that defines where we want to go in the future. I think we are totally committed to building on the things that I've described earlier. And the honest truth is we face similar challenges around the world, and we are both needing to make an energy transition as we tackle the issues of climate change. As two islands, we can't afford to be ignorant of or not take seriously the issue of climate change. And that's why it's one of the most important things that I want to work on here. How can we work together on the technology that will enable us to address climate change, but also encourage young people and others to get involved in this kind of existential issue.
So, speaking on that, what are some of the projects or upcoming initiatives that Singapore and the UK are working on that we can look forward to?
Yeah, well, we've touched briefly on climate change and energy transition, and I really think supporting each other's journey on that will be important. We signed a green economy framework with Singapore in the not too distant past, and that will provide the framework for what we do together. But I think alongside that, we have a really important science and technology partnership that I think we can develop further. I think there's more that we can do on digital trade, and there's a digital economy agreement that provides the framework for that. We talked about global challenges and Singapore and the UK working together to address some of the crises that are happening in the world. I think that will be important. And I think the final one is around education. 7,000 Singaporean students study in the UK every year. And, just recently I was at the A-Star ceremony for 23 scholars having scholarships to go to the UK this year, by far the biggest number. So I think growing the student population going there, but also increasing the UK education opportunities in Singapore, I think will be important.
Right. I have one idea on how we can learn more about climate change and the environment, the green economy. I think it would be great if you can bring Blackpink to Singapore and have her meet
I knew
Lawrence
this was
Wong.
coming, Joel.
Lawrence Wong is right there. He does a lot of social content. I guarantee you, viral straight away.
Yeah, but we need to find the Singaporean equivalent of Blackpink. Who would it be? Who, if you could collaborate or advise me and my team to collaborate with anyone to raise the profile of climate change, who would it be?
Oh my gosh, the last time I spoke to now President Tharman about music in Singapore, I recommended Ben King, and now he is singing this year's National Day song. I'm just saying I put him right. I'm just kidding. But Ben is so talented. I think if you could introduce him to the king, I would love to also get the invite to the palace. Just saying. But yeah, Ben King, he's national treasure to me.
So I'm going to the National Day Parade. And do you think it would be appropriate for me to, just after he finishes singing the national anthem, go and have a little conversation with him about,
I mean,
can I tell him that Joel Lim said it's all good?
Oh,
you just have that conversation.
Once you name drop my name, that's it. He will say yes to anything.
Okay.
No, but I'm serious though. I think Ben is a national treasure, and when it comes to Singapore's equivalent of Blackpink, I think the band that Ben came from, it's called the Sam Willows. Incredibly talented. I'm a huge stan. I love the music. So yeah, I do think that there's some the album should be on your Spotify playlist
Okay,
soon.
well, it will definitely be on my playlist. But there's a couple of kind of broader points on this. One is that you can't have that sort of Blackpink moment of engagement from a global superstar without the creativity in your team. And we definitely had it in my team in Seoul, and I have no doubt that we've got as much creativity in the High Commission in Singapore. So it may not be Ben specifically, but I have no doubt that we will come up with some brilliant ideas for how we might do this. And I think the second point, and I don't want to lose this, is that the Blackpink thing was not just because we wanted to work with a global superstar. The goal has to be clear, and the goal for us was to raise the profile of climate change
Yes.
around the world. And if we can, I'm sure we can find similar clear goals to go after. You sometimes have to dream big, I think, to achieve your ambitions. We had no realistic hope that we'd ever get a group like Blackpink on board. But you have to try and use the resources that are available.
Absolutely. I think the entire thing just worked out so perfectly.
Yeah.
I mean, sidetracking a little bit, I've always just said that, when it comes to entertainment and pop culture, these people do have an amazing platform, and they're able to engage with a certain target certain demographic that normally wouldn't engage actively, right? Maybe some of them do, but like for the most part, I think their interests then lie in entertainment and not really, like things like that. So, by reaching out through all these different ways, I think we are engaging like different parts of the population as well.
I totally agree with you, Joel. And some of the people I admire most are people who have used their excellence or their platform to be able to raise the profile of societal issues. Lewis Hamilton, our absolutely outstanding F1 driver, and how he's used his platform to talk about diversity and inclusion, and it's just something that is so impressive and inspiring. So yeah, I totally agree. We've those connections really make a difference.
Yeah, right. And for this part of the conversation next, I do want to talk about your personal experience in your career, right? Because, I was reading up on your journey, and I think it's been like 2 decades since you've been in this diplomatic role. And for me, it's like, in just even doing this particular podcast itself, sometimes I find myself navigating sometimes complex situations, and needing to maybe be a little more sensitive to different parties and whatnot. When it comes to your career and your role, like, were there any times where you found yourself facing challenges when it comes to facing like tricky situations to navigate?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say, Joel, is that I never thought I'd be a diplomat. I didn't actually know what a diplomat was. I did a degree in chemistry from UCL. I went to live and work in Japan after I graduated, not really knowing whether the foreign ministry, the diplomatic service, was even a career that was open to somebody that looked like me. It wasn't a dinner table conversation that I had with my parents. And I think we need to change that. Podcasts like this really help to decode diplomacy and make what we do much more accessible. And honestly, if I can do it, anyone can do it. You don't have to have an international relations background or be able to speak 7 languages. I just think if you have a desire to make the world a better place, to make it more prosperous, make it safer, make it healthier, I think those are the things that you need to have, the qualities that you need to have to be a diplomat. Yeah, there have been many times in my career where I've had challenges or had to decide what to do under intense pressure. COVID was a good example of that. When I was in Seoul, you may recall that there was this period after Wuhan became the epicenter of the pandemic that it switched to South Korea, and my ambassador and I were left with a question of what do we do to keep our staff safe, keep our embassy active, make sure that we're providing services, and some of the decisions that we had to take around that time. I look back on and think, wow, those were really, really difficult. But I'm pretty proud of how we got through that period. We never once closed. We never once stopped supporting the public, but we placed a premium on both trying to keep our staff and their families safe, but also providing as much support to our colleagues in the UK who are working out what the UK response should be.
And when facing a situation like this, what were some of the learning lessons that you had in perhaps like decision making or planning?
I think one of the things that I've really learned through my career is to manage my own resilience and to help support the resilience of my team. I found the work that I did on MH370, and we spoke about it earlier, was incredibly draining because I hadn't prepared myself, hadn't thought enough about how I deal with being in crisis for weeks and weeks on end. And I was exhausted. I hadn't really thought about how I would deal with that. I didn't have an outlet or a safety mechanism. So after that episode, I thought long and hard about what I needed to do to be a good leader, but also what sort of atmosphere I needed to create at the times that my team is under pressure. And honestly, one of the most important things to do is to be comfortable with saying to other people it's okay. You've done what you need to do. I now need you to go and rest and be ready for the next round of pressure that will be coming our way. And I wasn't good at that earlier in my career, and I hope I've got better over time.
Right. For this next question, I have to refer to my notes because the team wrote it out and I don't want to miss anything. So,
sounds like a good question.
So the team came across your speech at the South Korea's Anti-Discrimination Act in 2022, and you expressed interest in diversity and race issues, and also personally led multiple campaigns to improve the recruitment of staff from minority races because of your lived experience. You were also the National Security Community's co-champion for race. So maybe you can tell me about that and also share with me why diversity is so important to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. I'm glad you've asked this question. I believe really passionately that the UK's diversity in all its characteristics, I'm not just talking about race, but is a major strength of our country. And traditionally, many of the careers that we've spoken about, whether it's diplomacy or politics, have been thought to be the careers of a particular strand of society, maybe the white, middle to upper class, Oxford, Cambridge educated. And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with people from those groups being in diplomatic roles or in political roles, but you want to recruit from across UK society so that you have all of the talent available to you. And many of the reasons why that isn't the case is because people's perceptions of what it's like to be a diplomat or to be in other parts of government are different to the reality. And I feel that in my role, whether it's here or in other things that I've done, I can shine a light on what it's actually like to be a high commissioner or what it's actually like to be a director in London. I hope to demystify it and make it kind of accessible to people. And it's really driven by that firm belief that diversity, that creative thinking will drive better decisions. When I was in Korea, one of the things that we worked on was supporting the development of an anti-discrimination law in the country. It was one of the few countries in the OECD that didn't have anti-discrimination legislation. And without legislation like that, without the things like the UK Equality Act, victims often don't have the protection that they need. So I thought that I might be able to tell my story, or tell the story of race in the UK and how we developed the Equality Act as a way of catalysing the right conversations in Seoul, and support the parliamentarians who are keen to put this law into place.
And then how did that turn out?
Well, I think that the discrimination law is still going through the different processes in Seoul. I worked on it for about 18 months, and then I left. And of course, there's been a new government in South Korea, so it's not something that I've tracked closely in my time.
Now, before we wrap up today's conversation, I do want to ask you, having had such a illustrious, long, 20-year plus long career, what are some of the lessons that you've learned or picked up along the way that you will bring to your role moving forward?
Yeah, I think we're all shaped by our experiences, aren't we? You've become this brilliant podcaster because of some of the experiences that you've had on your journey, and I think that's I'm in this role, but I draw on heavily the experiences that I have, the brilliant mentoring that I've received from diplomats across the Foreign Office and elsewhere. But I also have an amazing team that has its own experience, its own skills. I mean, I think in our science and innovation team, we have 3 PhDs in there. It is a very, very talented group of people. So yes, I'll hopefully create the right environment for success, and I will. I talk a lot about kind and candid and compassionate leadership, and it means a lot to me. But I'll be doing this with the help of some incredibly talented people who are totally committed to enhancing our partnership with Singapore.
Awesome. We have to wrap the conversation soon, but before we go, when it comes to taking away 3 things perhaps from this conversation, or about the British High Commission, what would you like our listeners to know about you or the work that the British High Commission does?
Well, I can't say Ben 3 times, can I? Because that would be cheating. But your advice on who to work with, I think, to expand our reach, I think, has been really, really helpful. I've really appreciated that we've had an open conversation about the colonial legacy, and I think whilst we both recognise that we are sitting across the table from each other, both a product of that legacy, I think the future of the relationship with Singapore is a really, really bright and vibrant one. And I think the third thing is just to go back to why we're doing this conversation. Decoding diplomacy, taking away the airs and graces and the protocol, and ultimately, realizing that it's human beings talking to other human beings to solve difficult problems, I think is something that I hope will be inspiring to your listeners.
Absolutely. Well, that was very beautifully put, so thank you. And thank you for taking the time to do this conversation with me.
No worries. It's been an immense pleasure, and look forward to staying in touch.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Political Pruit, the podcast season 2. I hope you enjoyed learning more about the bilateral relationship between Singapore and the UK, and also the role of the British High Commission here. I would also like to thank Nik once again for coming on to this episode and sharing with us so much insights from his long career in diplomacy, and also all about Blackpink. So if you can, please hit that follow button and give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed the episode as much as I did working on it. And if you're joining us on YouTube, I would love to hear your thoughts on the episode, so please drop your comments down below. And also, please remember to hit that subscribe and thumbs up button. I'll see you guys next episode. This was the Zoda Pop Podcast.